took you so long?
I'm trying, okay? Jeez.
Hello human people, it's Vienna, and welcome to Queer Arena, where I occasionally piece together spooky queer mysteries. And this time we're talking about Archive 81, its adaptation, and the disappearance of one queer, and the appearance of another. Oh yeah, and spoilers ahead.
When Archive 81 was released on Netflix, some people noticed a certain lack. A gay lack. As it turned out, Melody Pendress, one of the main characters in the show and the first season of the podcast, had been made straight. Which of course the show had to underline. Gone was her wife Alexa as well. But as it turned out, another lesbian character had appeared in their place. In the podcast, Cassandra Wall was barely a footnote with one appearance and a couple of mentions. There's no mention of an Eleanor Wall and no indication that Cassandra is gay. In the Netflix series, she's basically the bad guy second in command who has a tendency to push people too far. And my question here is, why? Why take one lesbian character out and add in another?
I actually did my master's thesis on adaptation, which was some time ago. But that means I have some sources on hand for this subject.
Namely Linda Hutcheon and Siobhan O'Flynn's A Theory of Adaptation. In their book, Hutcheon and O'Flynn give 4 motivations for adaptations. Economic reasons are an obvious one. You only need to look in the direction of Marvel and Disney to see that. When you make an adaptation, you can assume there's a ready-made audience for you. This can even mean free marketing in the form of fandom buzz. Second, we have the requirements of law. Sometimes it's just better to license something rather than face possible legal action. So this one's a bit historical. The example Hutcheon uses is early cinema adapting plays and operas in order to increase the cultural appreciation of the new medium. But it also includes cases where one adapts, say, Shakespeare to prove themselves as a director or writer. I could imagine video games potentially doing this too, or certain genres that are looked down upon. And finally, we have what end up being the most controversial reasons. These include both deconstructions and using the prestige of an older work to prop up modern ideology with an appropriately slanted retelling.
Although these are reasons why one would want to adapt a given work, we can use them to formulate reasons for adaptation choices as well. But of course, these reasons are likely to get all tied up with each other. For example, economics and politics are never really that far from each other.
However, we can discard a few of these off the bat. We can probably agree that the law or contracts haven't required these changes. And I don't think audio drama podcasts can offer much in the form of prestige to streaming shows. Which leaves us with 2 likely culprits, one of which could be extra spicy.
Although it would be kinda easy and even a bit cathartic to say that this is all because of personal or political reasons, I don't think that's the main reason here. Economics is.
Hollywood and the rest of mainstream culture industry have a weird double relationship with queer characters and content in general. On the one hand, pink money is good money, and you can seem hip and cool for the kids. On the other hand, the all-American John and Jane might feel a bit iffy about the gays, and that means you're not getting there, and therefore everyone's money.
Of course, nothing can actually make all the money, and favoring one group like this over another kinda feels like you're saying one group is normal and one is special. Queer characters are still seen as a risk, especially if it's a queer main character. Except if it's an overtly queer show. When a show is marketed mainly towards queer people or allies, you don't expect to get all the monies, just the pink ones. But a show for everyone, the regular folks, for that you need someone normal. A podcast can get away with having a queer main character because audio drama podcasts are pretty far down the nicheness spectrum already.
But the economic answer doesn't quite make sense if we consider some other Netflix adaptations. Case in point, The Haunting of Bly Manor, an adaptation of The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which adds a lesbian romance and is actually structurally very similar to Archive 81. Both drop the threads of mystery in the first half of the show, and then reveal backstory to tie several of these threads in an episode set in the past before the climax of the season. Both are also adaptations.
To me, the biggest difference between these adaptations is how many times the adapted work has been adapted. Turn of the Screw has been adapted quite a few times, Archive 81 only once.
Let's go back to Hutcheon for a moment. She says, part of this pleasure of adaptations, I want to argue, comes simply from repetition with variation, from the comfort of ritual combined with the piquancy of surprise. Recognition and remembrance are part of the pleasure and risk of experiencing an adaptation. So too is change.
The Turn of the Screw has had several rounds of these repetitions and variations, and this might be why Netflix felt comfortable with having their newness be a dash of queerness. Archive 81, on the other hand, will feel novel just by being adapted. We can think of this as an introductory adaptation, something for the general audiences, which again gets us back to what the adapters thought wasn't suitable for these general audiences, i.e. the gay. But this reasoning only really explains why Melody has been made straight. It doesn't explain why Cassandra has been made a lesbian in the Netflix show. And to explain that, we might have to look at the most terrifying reason of all, the personal and the political.
Although the economic reasoning can explain changing a character straight, it doesn't explain changing another gay at the same time, particularly a villain.
People making mainstream shows know that although making the main character queer might not be the best idea if you want to make all the money, neither is making a villain queer.
Or at least an unlikable villain. I'm not against queer villains, of course, just as long as the point isn't to vilify queerness. And at first glance, Cassandra doesn't seem to be this kind of villain. But there's just something that nags me about a few things. Like this phantom kiss on the cheeks thing that is presented as something between mildly creepy and quirky. Or how she seems to manipulate and push people outside their comfort zones. Or how it's implied that she exploited her wife's connection to the other world.
When I look at this from the point of view of being an adaptation change and paired with making a lesbian character straight, this kinda starts seeming like a subtle case of the evil lesbian trope.
The evil lesbian is one of those tropes that you saw much more in the 70s and 80s. Basically, an evil lesbian is a lesbian character that tries to seduce a poor, innocent straight. This can range from just being a lesbian and a bit pushy to being manipulative psychopath out to destroy your life.
And a lot of Cassandra's characteristics and mannerisms can be read in support of this trope.
For example, the cheek kiss that Cassandra does begins to seem a bit more sinister in this light.
Aren't you lovely?
We can only see her do this to other women, and there is the feeling that she's using a form of seemingly polite intimacy to enter someone's personal space.
To be clear, I don't know or think that the showmakers intended for this reading, but the material is still there, especially because another character was straight wash. That's what's so weird about this choice, and it makes it seem like there is something going on here. And maybe there is some queer or lesbophobia going on here, but it's probably not overt but unconscious. Or this is just a set of very unfortunate choices that comes together in an even more unfortunate way.
The only reasons I can think of for these changes are either personal and political or economic with a dash of tokenism. I.e., someone went, well, we need a gay somewhere. The thing is that, especially when adapting something, choices made in the creation process are intentional. Even if you aren't trying to say something, you will be viewed as saying something in the context of the adapted work. But despite that, I don't really think this is a case of out and proud lesbophobia, but maybe just the far more common and insidious case of unconscious and structural kind of queerphobia. But who knows, maybe one of the writers or directors will tweet something very questionable. But until then, I'll just be mildly disappointed.
I've seen some claims that there is a pattern of lesbophobia in different Netflix shows, and although that would be a very interesting subject to get into, this won't be the time when I do that. But if you do have a suggestion for a movie, show, or other media thing that would have a queer reading potential, leave a comment below. And it'd be real nice if you would press those subscribe and like buttons as well. But for now, I'll see you in the next video.